Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. This is John Baker, IT Pro Evangelist with Microsoft Corporation. My blog is blogs.technet.com/John Baker. And this is part 4 in a 5-part series on the user state migration tool, automatically migrating user settings during a Windows 7 upgrade. And in part 4 of 5, we're going to take a drill down or take a closer look at the new feature that's in the USMT 4.0 called hard link migration. The User State Migration Tool 4.0 series that we're doing here is split up into 5 parts. Part 1 is the overview of the User State Migration Tool itself. Part 2 is we'll take a look at what's new in the USMT 4.0. Part 3 is the USMT scenarios. Part 4 is the hard link migration. And then finally on Part 5, we'll take a look at using the USMT for doing offline user state capture. And today we're looking at hard link migration. So today we're talking about the Hard Link Migration Store. And the Hard Link Migration Store is one of the most compelling new features of the USMT. As I've mentioned earlier, it's used for PC refresh scenarios only. So this is only used, or you can only use the hard link switch in the migration is if you're deploying to existing hardware. In other words, you're going to put the new operating system on the same machine. So all of the user data utilizing the hard link migration store option stays in place on the local disk. So what does that do for you? It greatly reduces the amount of time it takes to back up or to migrate that data off to a server share or off to another drive and then restore it. All of that time going back and forth is done away with. We keep it all locally. As I mentioned before in the previous parts in this series, the hard link migration requires a little bit of overhead, and all the overhead is a 250 megabytes of free disk space that it uses to build the store. But the bottom line, it doesn't use any extra data, any extra space for the user data, because the user data stays wherever it is on the disk. So migrating, for example, migrating gigabytes of user data, instead of taking hours or potentially hours going over the network and then coming back, it's going to take minutes. And I'll show you a slide about that in a few moments. So where can't you use the hard link migration store scenario? Well, if you're moving from one computer to another, obviously you can't do hard link migration because you're going to a completely different drive. It's on another system, so there's no way that hard linking it is going to help you. It won't even work. If you're migrating from one volume to another, again, you're going to a different drive, and you cannot do that. You can't migrate from one, or you can't hard link from one volume to another. If your disk is going to be formatted or repartitioned outside of Windows setup, that's going to cause problems too, because that means if you're going to format or repartition it outside of Windows setup, that means all your hard link and your store are going to get blown away. You don't want to do that, or you can't do that. And then if you're repartitioning during Windows setup, it will remove the migration store. So you cannot format and repartition outside of Windows setup, and you cannot repartition during Windows setup. Because remember, this is a migration store that's stored on that hard drive that you're going to install the operating system on, and it also has the user data and settings hard linked. They're not moved, they're kept where they are on that drive. And here's a graph to show you the hard link migration, right? But remember, I told you the hard link migration keeps the data on the drive. So whether you're doing 5 gigabytes or 30 gigabytes, if you look at the yellow line on the bottom of that graph, it doesn't matter. It's about 5 minutes, regardless of how much data that has to be scanned. And because you aren't moving any data, that's it. Whereas you notice as you move more and more data, it takes the migration time increases. Obviously, it starts on this chart here at 2 gigabytes, then 4 gigabytes, then 6 gigabytes. And as we start doing more data, you can see the time goes up and up and up. And in some cases, in my case, for example, my production system had about 120 gigabytes of user data. So you can imagine transferring that 120 gigabytes over the wire to a network share, or even to a local hard drive through a USB. That's going to take quite a while, and then on top of that, it's going to take just as much time to bring it back in. Whereas doing a hard link migration really saved me a bunch of time, because it took about 5 or 6 minutes to actually create that hard link store and lock those files down. So this graph here that I just wanted to show you is just showing you that the hard link really does improve the performance for your migration. And if you look at this, we're only going up to 14 gigabytes of data, and I'm sure you have users that have much more than 14 gigabytes of data. So if you're going to create scripts that are going to do hard link migrations, these are the command lines that you're going to want to use. Obviously, you're using like something like System Center Configuration Manager and or the MDT. The MDT will take care of all these switches for you based on what you tell it to do. But if you're going to create your own scripts to gather the state on a hard link store, we need to do a scanstate.exe, and then we need to tell it. In this case, I'm telling it C:\HL store, so that's my hard link store. That's where it's going to store the hard link store. And then you'll notice I have the /no compress. And it has to have /no compress for a hard link migration, otherwise it won't work. And then I have a /hard link. So scanstate.exe space C:\, the name of the store that I want to create, space /no compress /hard link is the command to create a hard link store on my local drive. Once I've then installed my operating system, the next command is to do the load state, to bring that hard link data back in. So the load state.exe, I've got to point again to my hard link store, in this case C:\HL store. And again, I've got to do the no compress switch and the hard link switch. And then finally at the bottom there, deleting the hard link store. Obviously the hard link store gets locked, so you wouldn't be able to delete it normally. And there's a USMT, and I talked about this earlier, USMT utils.exe utility that comes with the USMT 4.0. And you can see the command that you would use in your script here to remove that store is USMT utils.exe space /rd to remove the directory, space, and then the directory, in my case C:\HL store. Okay, in this demonstration, I'm going to do two things. Step one, I'm going to perform a save state before we do perform the migration. And then step two, I'm going to perform a load state after performing the migration. So let's move over to my machines. Okay, so in this demonstration, what I'm going to do is capture the user state of my Windows XP machine here, and I'm going to use the config.xml file that I created in part 3 of this series. So remember, user state can be saved to several locations. It can be saved either to a network share, to optical media, to detachable media, or to a local drive. And if you have sufficient local disk space and you're deploying Windows 7 to that existing machine, then saving that data or saving that state locally gives you the best performance because the information doesn't go over the network and back. And remember, I talked about that feature called hard linking. However, in this case here, I've got a Windows XP machine and I have a separate Windows 7 machine. So for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to save the state to a network file share so that I can then deploy it to my new Windows 7 machine. So before I do this, let me bring up my Explorer and I'll show you where the share is in my environment. I've actually got it on my Seattle DC public folder under user state. There we go. And right now you can see there's nothing there. So let me minimize that. And let me bring up a command prompt. And let me change my directory to program files, Windows AIK, tools, USMT, x86. So now I'm in here. I'm going to do my scan state. And obviously I got to tell it where it's going to put that scan or put that file. So I'll tell it public user state. Then I want to tell it I want to include my migapp.xml. Also want to include my user miguser, sorry, .xml. And I also want to include my config file that I created from part 3. And remember I called that config.xml. And remember that custom config file basically said don't migrate any music. So now let me press enter. And you can see it's going through the migration process. Remember, I've got a fairly limited amount of files to make this demonstration go much quicker. You can see it's doing the local administrator, the Woodgrove administrator, and also the Woodgrove Don Hall. So those are the only 3 users that are getting migrated here. There you see it's gathering data for the local administrator. Now it's gathering data for the Woodgrove administrator. And now it's gathering data for Don Hall. So this should all be done fairly soon. It's a fairly small, obviously in reality, if you were doing this on a regular machine, it would take a lot longer because there's a lot more data that needs to be gathered and migrated over the network. So once this is done, I'll switch back to my folder there and you'll see the state. Great. So there it is. It's done. So let me switch back over here, and you should see my USMT folder. If I open that up, there's my MIG file, USMT MIG file. Okay. So let me minimize this. Okay, before I move on, I just want to show you that there is an option of doing a scan state without having to provide where the MIG apps and MIG docs XML files are. And that option actually is a switch that says /auto. So if I do, let me do another one here. Let me click on my command prompt. So I'll do a scan state. And in this case, I'm going to put it to a different location so that it doesn't overwrite my file. So I'm going to put it to public / user state _test, and then I'm just going to do a /auto. And what /auto does is it provides a pre-configured configuration. So that option includes the i:/migdocs.xml. It also includes the i:/migapp.xml, and also includes a verbosity of 13 for the level of status reported on this. So let me press enter there, and that should now go off and create my automatic scan state there. And then while that's going, let me just come over here and come back to user state _test. So that should be creating it in this folder here. You can see it's creating it, and then once it finishes, I just move that down slightly so you can see when it finishes. There we go. And there we were just using an option to just do a /auto, which means you don't need to type in all the XML files. There you can see it, and then it's created by USMT MIG file. Before we go on here, I just want to very quickly show you how we could do a hard link. If we wanted to do a hard link migration on this machine, how we would do it. And remember, the hard link gathers the data or scans and then saves the data, hard links the data locally on that hard drive. So again, we're going to do a scan state, and then I've got to tell it where it's going to go. So I'll put it in my C drive underneath the HL or hard link store. I'll use the auto switch because that way it saves me typing in to include MIG user and MIG app. That automatically includes that. It also includes the verbosity of the status report into a verbosity level 13. Also, what I want to do here is a /o, so it will overwrite. If that store already exists, /o will overwrite it. /c will continue on soft errors. I need to do a no compress, and then I also need to put in the hard link switch. So now what's going to happen, it's going to do exactly the same as it did before. It's going to scan the machine, scan the users, and instead of creating that single migration file that I put up on my Seattle DC share, that user state share, it's actually going to create a folder structure under that C:/HL store. So you can see here it's examined the system, discovered the 3 users that it's migrating. Now it's actually gathering the data that's going to be migrated. So that it's scanning and gathering that data. A couple more seconds, maybe 15, 20 more seconds, it will finish. And all of that data will now be on my C drive. So once it's there, let me go over to my C drive. Great, it's there. So on my C drive, I should now have, let me do a refresh. There's my HL store. So if I open that up, you can see it creates a USMT folder. There's some configuration-related files that are stored here. And then if I open up the file, go in here, go into Documents and Settings, you can see I've actually got the file structure of the files that have been scanned. So there's those 2 PowerPoints and those 2 Word documents, and also if I drill into my pictures, obviously. So you can see this is an uncompressed hard link store. So now what would happen if part of my process was to now wipe out Windows XP and install Windows 7, I would then do a load state to unlock those files. So those files and my hard link store folder are locked and cannot be overwritten right now. Now, in order to get rid of this, because for my demonstration I don't want it there, I'm going to do my USMT utils. Remember there was a USMT utils.exe utility. I'm going to do a /rd, which removes the directory, and obviously I have to tell it which directory I want removed, and that's the HL store. Spell it correctly. Okay, so I'm doing USMT utils /rd to remove directory, and then C:/HL store to tell it what directory I want removed. Comes up here, gives me a warning, says you're going to delete the following path, please review. I'll say yes, because that's what I want gone. And now my HL store is gone, or should be. And just to verify that, I didn't mean to close my Explorer window, but let me bring it up again. And now you can see my HL store is gone. So let me minimize that. Okay, now we're ready to switch over to my Windows 7 machine, and I've already logged on to my Windows 7 machine as administrator because I need admin capability for this to run. So I'm going to bring up a command prompt, and then I'm going to go into my CD program files, Windows AIK, Tools, USMT, x86. Now, instead of doing my scan state, I'm going to be doing my load state here. So I'll do a load state. I'll tell it where it's coming from. So it's from public/user state. And then I got to tell it, or I want to include my MIG file, my MIG app XML. Also, I want to include my MIG user.xml. And one of the other things I can do here is if there's users that are in that migration file that I don't want to be brought over and migrated into this machine, I can either include them or exclude them. So in this case here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a /UI, which is user include, and I'm going to put in Woodgrove Bank /Don Hall. And then I'm going to do a /UE, which is user exclude, and in this case I'm going to do a Woodgrove Bank /administrator. So it will bring in the user data and settings for Don Hall, but not for the Woodgrove Bank administrator. Another thing I can do is LAC, and this will actually create, if there's a bunch of local users that were on XP, those will also get scanned and saved into my migration file. When I load state that migration file into this new machine, if I do a /LAC, it will create those new users on my new machine. However, it won't create them with a password, so I want to give them a password. So that's the password that all those users are going to get. The other thing it doesn't do is because it doesn't migrate with a password, those accounts are created if I do an LAC, but they're disabled. So I'm going to do an LAE, which will enable those accounts. So let me press enter. This is going to take a couple of minutes. And this will now go off and finish, and this will be finished in probably about a minute or so. Okay, so you can see on here, if I come up here and let me mark it, you can see how, because I excluded the Woodgrove administrator, it did not bring it over, right? So the Woodgrove Bank Don Hall was examined, and the Seattle Win 701, which is a local administrator, was examined. And here in my call to action and resources slide, at the top, I have my online presence. So I've got a blog, blogs.technet.com/John Baker. I also have a landing page for deployment essentials on the Microsoft.com/events/series/deployment-essentials.aspx. And that's where I have my screencast videos hosted. And then in the middle of that slide, you'll see the Windows Automated Installation Kit, or Wake, for Windows 7, which is the latest version of the Wake. And I've put a bit.ly link up there for it, which is bit.ly/ lowercase fp, uppercase n, 90 lowercase z. So that will get you to the Wake for Windows 7. And then there's also a Windows 7 walkthrough of the user state migration tool. And again, I put a bit.ly link up there, and it's bit.ly/lowercase fcz, uppercase I, lowercase x, 6. And that concludes part 4 of our 5-part series. Up next is part 5, and in part 5 we're going to take a more in-depth look at the offline user state capture. So thanks for listening, and please join me in part 5.